Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 626, and today's date is March 26, 2015, and the title of this episode is The Middle East War Will Eventually Lead to World War. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, we understand that the unemployment numbers, they're completely manipulated. I mean, we had the CEO of Gallup come out and tell us that, hey, these numbers make absolutely no sense. It's impossible that the unemployment is around 5.5%. It makes no sense whatsoever. And when he looked into it, and when we looked into it, and when many other people looked into it, we see that yes, the United States government, the central bankers, they're not counting those people who haven't gotten a job in a certain amount of time. And they're counting them as they've just given up. They don't want to support their family. They don't want to go on vacation. They don't want to have a good job. They don't want to get another job. And we know this is completely ridiculous. And we can see that the initial jobless claims, every time this comes out, we can see that they kind of leave off certain people from it. And we've had the initial jobless claims come out, and it has been unchanged. Right now, we can see that it kind of stalled. And we have to remember, those people who work part-time jobs, first of all, they're counted as having a full-time job. But when they go ahead and they apply for unemployment insurance, they need to be making a certain number of dollars per week, or they need to work a certain number of hours per week. And if they're not, they cannot claim unemployment. But they're counted as having a full-time job. So again, when we look at this, we have to look through what the government, what the central bankers are giving us, and we can see that, yeah, a lot of this stuff makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Now, they came out with the initial jobless claims. And what's very interesting is every time they come out with that, it seems that layoffs kind of pick up. And we see that U.S. Steel is laying off 2,080 people. Woodside Petroleum laying off 300. Staples Regina Call Center laying off 200. We see Express Times newspaper, they're planning their layoffs. And Saskatoon's Case New Holland, 443 people. And I'm sure there's a lot of little mom and pop stores out there, a lot of other retail that are laying off, letting people go. And we can see this trend is continuing. And it's going to be very difficult for these people to go out and find work. I mean, I have a lot of people emailing me. I have a lot of people that I speak to, and they're saying that the job market right now is very, very difficult. Now, if you want a part-time job, a lot of people are able to find those jobs. But if you're coming from a job that's making 80, 90, 100,000, and you see the rest of the companies are laying off in those type of positions, it is very difficult to go ahead, send your resume out, and find that exact same job. Now, a lot of times what you'll find is jobs that are paying a lot less, but again, what people normally do is they wait it out and they say, oh wait, why would I want to make $30,000 or $20,000 less? I want the same job because I purchased my car, my house, I pay my rent, or whatever it is, under that umbrella of making a certain number of dollars per year. And if I change this, things in my life is going to change. So a lot of people continually send out their resume, they wait for that job, and guess what happens? They can't find it. And this is what's happening today. Now, of course, the U.S. government central bankers, they're continually trying to convince us that we're in a recovery, and we're continually seeing more and more evidence that we are nowhere near a recovery. Actually, everything that we look at is going in the opposite direction. Actually, the Kansas Fed, they're looking at it and they are saying, wait a minute, something is going on here. It doesn't match up with what the U.S. government central bankers are saying. The Kansas City Fed index tumbled to -4 in March against expectations of a +1. And was last below this level in February 2013. The Kansas City Fed has now missed for 6 of the last 8 months, and the report is a disaster across the board. New orders plunged to -20, the second lowest print since Lehman. Order backlogs imploded, average work week collapsed to -17. As one respondent noted, we do not see the economy as being as strong as portrayed in the national media reports. That's because they're fudging it. They're manipulating it. They're trying to convince everyone that everything is fine. And what we're seeing is that nothing is fine. Actually, things are heading in the opposite direction. I mean, let's think about this for a second. Back in 2007, going into 2008, they were continually telling us that everything was fine. I mean, remember, subprime? We contain that. Don't worry, people. Go back to other things. There's nothing to see here. The Fed was out there saying, listen, we're not forecasting any type of recession anytime soon. And that was in the year of 2008. They told us, oh, once the AIG got the bailout, everything is fine. They just need the first one. Well, that wasn't the only bailout. Oh, Greece is doing perfectly right after the 2008 crash. We just gave them a bailout. They're going to be fine now. They're back on their feet. And we can see that none of this is true. They always try to convince us of the opposite of what is really happening. And we can see they're doing everything they possibly can to convince us that we are absolutely fine. And we can see by looking around the world, we see that China started the BRICS system, started the Chinese Development Bank. We see the European countries and Australia all joining up to that. We see they're making bilateral trade, making hub centers to trade in yuan renminbi, which is one and the same, really. The UK right now has become the first country in Europe to open a yuan-denominated money market fund, cutting out the middleman for investing in China. The exchange-traded fund is listed on the London Stock Exchange with trading available in pounds, euro, and yuan. It allows investors direct access to China's interbank lending market instead of going through intermediary sources. So basically they're bypassing the dollar. And we can see a lot of countries are doing this. They're looking at what is going on. They see the United States. Let's see, they lost their manufacturing. The debt is continually increasing. They continually raise the debt ceiling over and over and over again because it's really meaningless at this point. They see the United States government central bankers losing control of the Middle East. They see they have contained Russia in Eastern Europe. They have troops in the Middle East. They have troops in the Pacific encircling China, troops in Africa, and regime change all over the place. And they're looking at this and saying, okay, we see what's going on here. The dollar is dying. It's collapsing. We better protect ourselves. We better join up to the BRICS. We better enter bilateral trades. We better set up hubs. We better keep the yuan renminbi in reserves. Because we see the United States government, the central banking system, is at its end game. And everyone's starting to wake up to this, and they're starting to de-dollarize. We see China may replace U.S. Catepillar as partner of Russian locomotive manufacturer. The Russian state corporation UVZ may start cooperation with China on its project of development and production of locomotives. Earlier, the corporation planned to implement the project with the U.S. company Catepillar. But what happened? The United States government placed sanctions on UVZ. And they said, we are now banned from doing business with Catepillar. We will have to look to China to help us out. And this is going to hurt Catepillar. It's going to hurt the United States. Does it really hurt Russia or China? Actually, it's a benefit to them. Actually, all these sanctions right now are hurting Europe, the United States. Russia's economy is improving. It's getting better. While the United States economy is falling apart and collapsing. Now we understand why all this is going on and the United States is collapsing, and they know. They understand that they only can keep it going for a little bit longer. They keep pushing it each year. Oh, if we could just get it to next year. If we could just get it to next year. If we just get that war going, we can cover up this entire thing and they won't blame us. When I say us, the U.S. government, the central banking system. And in the meantime, what they're doing is they're creating their lists of people who are going to be a threat to their authority. They're trying to implement new laws to spy on the people, implement new taxes to keep the revenue pouring in. And what they're finding out is that the American people have no more revenue. They just can't find it anywhere. They went all across the world to find this revenue, and it's getting harder and harder to bring more in. And of course, what they're trying to do right now is pass more legislation to spy on the American people. But they're trying to convince us that it's for our protection, it's to help us. And we can see there's a lot of people now coming out saying, yeah, this isn't exactly what it really means. And what I'm talking about is CISA. The new American Foundation, Robin Green, outlined the elements within CISA that she says makes it look more like a cyber surveillance bill more than anything else. Companies being able to monitor their users' activities, requiring DHS to automatically disseminate all the data it collects to the NSA, and permitting companies to retaliate against any user it deems responsible for a cyber attack. Well, how are they going to figure this out? By collecting their information. I hate to say it, but cyber attackers, they don't work in this way. Actually, most of the people cover their tracks very well. And if you're an advanced actor who does something like this, they bounce it off many different servers, and they hide what they're doing. It's very difficult to track them down. And by giving my personal information or your personal information is not going to help whatsoever. It goes on to say that the bill creates an unnecessary exemption to the Freedom of Information Act and would increase the intelligence community access to Americans' personal information without adequate legal protections against the use of cyber threat information to investigate whistleblowers or conduct broad surveillance unrelated to specific cybersecurity threats. And we know this. They're implementing these laws to keep track of people, to find out where your money is, what your purchasing habits are. All this is collected, and it's all brought up to a central database system to help out with the lists, and before that time to help out and find out exactly where your money is, because that's what they're concerned about right now. They're trying to bring as much revenue or find out if you're hiding anything, and they want to get it. And this is why we see all of this. I mean, out in Australia, what are we seeing? Well, Australians will have 2 years of their metadata stored by phone and internet providers after the Abbott government's passed this new controversial data retention law. The government believes the laws, which allow about 85 security and policing agencies to access 2 years of an individual's metadata, are crucial to thwart terrorism attacks and prevent serious crimes. This is not going to help them whatsoever. All this is going to do, it's going to make it easier for them to track every single person. And in a previous report, MIT did a study of metadata, and when they take the metadata and they correlate it to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, because most of these follow you on your phone, that knows your location, they can pinpoint exactly where you're going and what you're doing, what you're purchasing. So we can see right now they're keeping this to spy on the people in Australia. And the Australian government, they must be getting a little bit nervous too, because we can see right now the Abbott government is pressing ahead with plans to fortify the wing of the federal Parliament that will see the Prime Minister's office screened by a steel security fence and 2 bulletproof concrete gatehouses. And of course, they're out there, no, this is to protect the government officials from the terrorists. Just like the U.S. government, who is fortifying all government buildings, putting up buffer zones, erecting larger fences. They said the new physical security measures, which according to Mrs. Bishop's office, will cost around $2 million. New security measures implemented so far include increased federal police deployments, Inside and outside the buildings, tighter access pass requirements for visitors to non-public areas, and new physical security measures in Parliament's public foyer. And we can see right now they are getting ready. This is not for terrorism. All these people know that this terrorism that we're seeing in Canada, Australia, the United States, UK, the Middle East, is ginned up to create panic, to create fear, and it's done from the inside. So now they have the excuse to create draconian laws, to keep people silent, to monitor every single person, to lock down and block internet sites that they don't want people out there seeing, to add additional security for the government officials. And what they're doing is they're adding more and more laws, taking away the rights of the people. And those rights are freedom of expression, freedom of speech. And we see in Spain, we know there's a new law. It's called the gag law. And this gag law, what it does, it restricts citizens' freedoms and criminalizes the right to manifest where the people would like to protest. And if you do this, you could be fined up to 600,000 euros for protesting outside of certain buildings without obtaining permission. The law also stipulates fines for those who protest outside government buildings, burn the national flag, insult police officers, refuse to be identified, and post photographs of police officers on social media. And by the way, 600,000 euros is $659,000. So we have the Spanish No Somos Delito platform, and they're staging a first of its kind demonstration using holograms against the introduction of the country's gag laws, because they don't want to be fined. And I don't think this has the same response as physical people protesting, showing holograms of people. The world's first protest by hologram will take place in April, according to the local media. Any person in the world can participate, having their photo converted into a hologram. And we can see they're saying this could be the wave of the future where all protests are in holograms. Well, that's not really a protest. That's you hiding someplace and projecting your image somewhere, and the government could care less. It's when the people are out there physically protesting. That's the impact the government is trying to squash right now. And by having this hologram protest, the government is winning. As we know from my previous reports, the United States government central bankers, they are placing a THAAD battery deployment in South Korea. This is the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense. And we can see that North Korea is a little upset about this. The North Korean Foreign Ministry pointed out that the projected THAAD deployment was part of Washington's strategy aimed at forming the U.S., Japan, South Korea triangular military alliance, the Asian version of NATO. And China is out there saying, they have expressed concerns regarding the U.S. missile system deployment in South Korea because it could be used against China, it could be used against North Korea, and it could be used against Russia. And they're a little nervous about this system being there, and we see that North Korea will expand its military deterrence in response to the U.S. THAAD system. And this is how it begins. The U.S. government, the central bankers, they move their military assets all over the world in Eastern Europe, and the other countries see this. They see more military assets being placed in their area, and they're scratching their heads going, why are they doing this? Why are they placing this right here? And if they're going to place something there, we're going to have to add something on our side. And this is the first part of provoking. And then, of course, the corporate media comes out and says, oh, look, North Korea just added their ballistic missile system or some other type of military asset, and we don't know why this is happening. And they never give you the story that, well, the United States went ahead and they put the THAAD system right in South Korea, pointing the missiles right at North Korea. And, of course, they kind of skip over that completely. Now, out in Ukraine, we understand the situation out there is not getting better. It's actually getting worse. And we see that 60% of Ukrainians are completely unhappy with Poroshenko and Yatsenyuk. They see what is happening in the country and they realize this country is falling apart, and why are these people in power? And I wouldn't be surprised if we see some type of rising up of the people. I wouldn't be surprised if we see them try to remove Yatsenyuk or Poroshenko. And if Poroshenko and Yatsenyuk don't do what the central bankers want, I can see U.S. government coming in and removing them to get the war started. Now we see Germany's Bundestag has ratified the Ukraine-EU Association Agreement on March 26, which is today. Ukraine is on its way to the European family. And Poroshenko wrote on his Twitter account, Ukraine is Europe, and this is exactly what the coup d'etat was all about. It was about putting Ukraine on the EU system because the elected government was moving towards Russia, making a deal with Russia and going with the Russian system. And of course, the U.S. government, central bankers, the EU system, they need to spread their debt further and further out. And this is why they did this. This is why they like to have regime change. Because, of course, they get the country, they place a central bank in there, and they start pushing debt throughout the country. This is how their system works. And if they can't do this, the systems collapse. And this is why they have done this here. And of course, it's a strategic location. They wanted the location on the Black Sea. They wanted to be right up on the border of Russia. But this is all falling apart, and we can see they're not abiding by the Minsk agreements. Now, out in Kiev, we see that the Ukrainian armed forces have moved at least 30 pieces of heavy weapons, including tanks and artillery, to Donetsk. A column of heavy vehicles was noticed in the morning in the area of Seladovo, moving towards Donetsk. The column comprises of about 10 to 15 tanks and about 20 artillery weapons of different caliber. And we know the central bankers, they didn't get what they paid for. They paid for the southeastern part of Ukraine and Crimea, and all they got left with was the West, which has no manufacturing or production. They don't have the port, which is on the Black Sea, and Poroshenko is taking instructions from the central bankers. He also has to deal with Putin, Angela Merkel, Hollande, with this Minsk agreement. So he's stuck in the middle here, and the central bankers are saying, no, we want war, you must push war. And we can see that Kiev is also moving tanks in the Lugansk area. 3 tanks have entered the territory in that area. So what are they planning and what are they ready to do here? And in the House of Representatives, we know they have a majority vote to ship lethal weapons to Ukraine. And I think they have enough votes where it's veto-proof at this point in time. So this means they're getting ready to go all out for a major offensive. Now, the only thing that can stop this could be maybe a civil war inside Ukraine where the people rise up, they push the government out, and this might change things a little bit. But we're going to have to watch this very closely because we see that certain things are starting to happen in Ukraine. The people are starting to look at the situation. They're protesting. They don't like Yatsenyuk. Poroshenko has a very low approval rating, and we might see things completely change in a short period of time. But we're going to have to watch this to see what happens. And we know Poroshenko is receiving the non-lethal equipment, which then he puts lethal equipment on top, and they use it in the different areas, and all of this is still coming in. We also understand that the U.S. military is going to join Ukraine National Guard drills in April in Lviv. Specialists from the United States will participate in military exercises in Ukraine's western Lviv, starting in April. So everything is pointing to a spring, early summer, major offensive. I mean, this is what we are seeing right now. This is what all the indicators are pointing to, and we will continually report on this and see what will occur. Now, the Russian Foreign Ministry has pointed to the possible deployment of NATO strike aircraft capable of carrying nuclear weapons near the Russian border, and they're very concerned about this. I guess they're hearing rumblings that, yes, this might happen, and we're going to have to watch that very carefully. Now, out in the Middle East, we see things are really deteriorating very, very quickly, and they're accelerating. We understand that Libya, the government there, has fallen, and Yemen, we know the president has fled the country and is now in Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia started bombing Yemen out of nowhere. Yemen didn't attack. Yemen didn't do anything to Saudi Arabia. They decided, hey, we're going to strike into Yemen to protect ourselves. Now we understand why the U.S. Embassy in Saudi Arabia was closed indefinitely, and we understand why the U.S. Embassy in Djibouti was closed down, because they were planning this all along. This was the event, and that was the purpose of closing those two embassies, because they knew Yemen was falling. They knew they were going to have to eventually go into each one of these countries. And after Yemen, they're going to be going into Libya. I just wanted to give a little brief understanding of who the Houthi people are in Yemen. Initially, the group was organized as an assembly called the Faithful Youth Forum. Subsequently, it split into two movements. The first was called the Greater Openness, while the second supported strict adherence to traditional heritage. The founder of the group, his name was Hussein Houthi, and he was more towards the first movement for greater openness. Supporters of the movement were called Houthi after the founder, and in 2004, Hussein Houthi accused the president of Yemen, Saleh, of serving U.S. interests, which, of course, he was. He was a puppet government. And we know this is what happens. Then the president made an attempt to arrest Houthi, and it ended in his death, sparking the protest movement. Houthi's father became the group's new leader. He was succeeded by his brother, Abdul Malik Houthi. In 2011, the Houthis were among the many forces that took part in the uprising against Saleh. In 2014, after repeated incidents of discrimination and rights abuse by the government of Yemen, the Houthis forced the president to step down, accusing him of insufficient protection of the population from terrorism. And here we are today, where the Houthi movement has taken over the entire country. And we can see that Saudi Arabia, United States government, who put the puppet government in place, doesn't want this to happen. And what's very interesting about this is that the Yemen rebels, they gained access to secret U.S. files. The Houthi rebels obtained secret Yemeni intelligence documents with details about U.S.-backed counterterrorism operations, including the names and locations of informants. The documents were stolen when Houthi fighters took over the office of Yemen's National Security Bureau in the country's capital of Sana'a. So, this just came out that they took these documents, and then we had Saudi Arabia decide to go in and just bomb Yemen. And again, Yemen did not do anything to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia decided, we're a little nervous for the security of our country, and this is why we need to go into Yemen. But what's very interesting about all of this, everything that's going on, it's completely the opposite of what happened in Ukraine. Because you have to remember, when the United States government central bankers wants to take over the country, remove the government, the people want democracy. They want freedom. And they have the right to protest. They have the right to kick out their government. Once the United States has a puppet government in place, guess what rights the people have? They have no rights. Because when we look at this, what's happening in Yemen right now happened in Ukraine. Except the United States government central bankers had a puppet government in place. So the people don't have the right to overthrow their government. And right now the United States is giving logistical and intelligence support to the Gulf. U.S. military taking military action to defend Saudi border, to defend against Houthi violence. And we can see that they are building up on the border. They're getting ready for a major ground invasion. And right now, the Saudi Arabia has imposed a naval blockade on the Red Sea Strait, because we have to remember, and we talked about this before, Yemen is right at the choke point between the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea. Basically, this is the fourth biggest shipping choke point in the world by volume. 3.8 million barrels a day of oil and petroleum products flow through this area and is just 18 miles wide at its narrowest point. It's located between Yemen and Djibouti. And we have to remember, we were talking about this all along, about how they were getting ready to go into Yemen and into Libya. If we go back to January 22nd, 2015, I did a report, episode 572, that talked about how the U.S. warships were right outside of Yemen, the Iwo Jima and the USS Fort McHenry. And they are on standby in the Red Sea, ready to go in there at a moment's notice. And each one of these ships has about 2,000 Marines on board, ready to go in. And right now, the Yemen airspace is completely closed down while Saudi Arabia continually bombs this area. Now we see on the Yemen border, it's not just Saudi Arabia that has their troops ready to go in for a main ground assault. We see Egypt is involved. We see Bahrain is involved. We see Qatar is involved. We see United Arab Emirates is involved. Kuwait, Jordan, Morocco, and Sudan. They are all joining in. This is the same coalition that is fighting in Iraq, fighting in Syria, and here they are under the control of the United States government central bankers. They need to retake these countries. They need to keep the puppet governments in each and every one of these countries. 3 Egyptian military and security officials told the Associated Press that a coalition of countries led by Egypt and Saudi Arabia will conduct a ground invasion into Yemen once the airstrikes have sufficiently diminished the Houthis. They said the assault will be by ground from Saudi Arabia and by landings on Yemen's Red and Arabian Sea coast. And we can see right now that the people in Yemen are saying, wait a minute, we're all not part of this movement. We're just people that are living in peace. And there are hundreds of residents walking around all the rubble. And it's starting to look like the residents might be joining up with the Houthis, because Saudi Arabia and all these nations just came in and started bombing their cities, and with no provocation whatsoever. And this might work in the opposite way they want, and the Houthi movement might get larger and larger, because we have people out there that were around the rubble and stuff chanting death to al-Assad in reference to the kingdom's royal family. And it seems like the people are going to protect their homes, protect their country, and fight these invaders. But that's basically what they are. They're invading the country at this point. Now, at the same time this is all happening, the IMF, of course, went ahead and suspended its loan to Yemen indefinitely, citing a host of uncertainties. You mean like a complete war that is going on inside the country, and the puppet government is completely out of there. Basically, in September, the IMF approved a $552.9 million line of credit to help highly impoverished Yemen maintain economic stability and promote inclusive growth, which they're not going to see any growth if the IMF is giving them more and more debt. The first installment of the 3-year loan, nearly $74 million, was made available immediately, and they're just suspending all of it because of what is going on there. Now, the Saudi coalition is being praised by John Kerry. Well, of course, they're directing the whole thing because they don't have the authorization for war. They couldn't go in there and do this, so they need the other countries to do this, and they're taking directions from the United States government. And Iran and Iraq and Russia are saying, no, you cannot do this. You just can't go into another country and do what you're doing here. And we need to talk about peace. We need to see what is really going on here. And if they did overthrow the government, the new people, the new government will be in place. But of course, the United States government, central bankers, they don't want this. They want the government, puppet government, back in power. We see that the Iranian lawmaker is out there, and he's saying the war in Yemen against Houthi militants will backfire on Saudi Arabia and end in failure. The lawmaker stressed that Saudi Arabia's responsibility for a new war demonstrates that it does not care about the problems of the Muslim world. No, they don't. They're just taking instructions from the United States government central bankers. Because if they let this government fall, the government in Libya fall, it will spread. And Saudi Arabia likes getting the money from the United States. They like a lot of it. And this is why they're doing this. The Iranian lawmaker outlined the role of the United States in the conflict, stating that Washington has a role to play in the situation. The Arab League countries could not act without the consent of the United States. And we know this is exactly what's happening. They are taking their orders from the United States. Putin is out there, and he is saying that, listen, we need to calm the situation down. We shouldn't be just going in there with military. We need to talk about it. We need to have a peace process. Why is Putin the only one that's trying to talk about peace in each one of these situations? And the United States government central bankers is on the other side, always pushing war, war, war. Isn't that amazing? Now, Kuwait has stepped up their security at their oil facilities because what is going on right now, and they're very worried that this is going to spread throughout the Middle East, and it might start spreading throughout the Middle East because as the ground invasion, once that starts, we can see the Houthi people and the other people that will most likely join in will fight Saudi Arabia and all these nations, and this might spread throughout the other countries. Libya might see this, and I'm not talking about the puppet government, the people in Lebanon, and they might say, you know something, it's time to continually fight and push harder to get these puppet governments out because this is what's going to happen and we need to take a stand. And we can see right now, the United States government, they're ready to go in. They're building up their military assets. They have ships in the area standing by. They're bringing everything into Kuwait. And the only thing they need is the authorization for war. And as this continually goes on, they're going to keep pressure on Congress to say, you see what's happening here? We need to go in and fix the situation in each and every one of these countries. Now, we understand that the Iran deal is moving forward. But what's very interesting about this, and since the beginning, is that the deal is a secret. President Obama has kept it under lock and key. Only a certain number of people are allowed to go in and see it. You have to get clearance. You can't bring a phone. You can't make a photocopy. And Jen Psaki was out there saying, listen, no one is going to know what's in this deal until it's signed. Well, that must mean it's not something that the American people will probably want. And most likely it's to infiltrate the banks inside Iran, because there's no other reason to make this deal. It's not because of their nuclear technology. They have the constant inspections from the IAEA. They signed the non-proliferation treaty, and all the propaganda out of Israel was just that, propaganda that they're making a nuclear weapon. And we can see right now, they would love to capture their natural resources, set up the central banking system, and sell all that oil using the US dollar. And this is the reason they're keeping everything sealed so nobody knows what's going on. Now we can see that Syria once again is being blamed for the delays of the chemical weapons elimination delay, and Syria is saying it has nothing to do with us. It's the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. They're the ones who are delaying, not Damascus. But of course the United States always jumps on this, and the other nations jump on this saying, see, Syria doesn't want to get rid of their chemical weapons. Yeah, they've been following along. They've been doing everything they need to do, and it looks like the OPCW warned that, yeah, it's going to take a little bit longer. We won't be able to finish in June. It will take us until September. And right now, Assad is saying that, you know what? We want a stronger presence in the Middle East. We would love Russian ships to be in the port of Tartus, and we would like more of Russian ships to keep the balance, because he understands what's coming. He realizes that eventually they are going to come after him, and they want Russia right there on the port with their ships, with troops ready to go if this happens. The United Kingdom now is sending about 75 military advisors to train Syrian moderate opposition forces, and we understand the U.S. is also training these forces because they're getting ready for a major offensive. I wouldn't be surprised if it comes in late spring or in the middle of the summer, especially when Congress goes on vacation. It seems like every August there's a major event or offensive that occurs, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is when they're looking to do this. Now we see more warnings. The U.S. Embassy in Uganda, and we've had this warning before, and as we know, the United States government central bankers would love to get in Uganda. China is there, and they're saying that there's terrorism all around. The U.S. Embassy has received information of possible terrorist threats. Everyone has to be careful. It's on lockdown, and we might see an event occur in this area. Now, I just wanted to talk about what happened with the Germanwings plane. I see it's all over the corporate media that the co-pilot locked himself inside and he downed the plane. And the pilot left because he had to go to the bathroom. He left the 28-year-old German co-pilot inside there, and when he came back, he started banging on the door and they wouldn't let him in. But what's very interesting is in the recordings, the co-pilot said absolutely nothing. Said absolutely nothing when he was in there. The co-pilot didn't respond to calls to open the door. Commander tries to re-enter the cockpit, but not able to. Now, there is a keypad on the outside of the cockpit, and there's a toggle switch inside. And if they put it on lock, it shuts everything down for 5 minutes, and you can't use the keypad, which I'm looking at. It won't allow you to enter. And this is the information that I'm looking at, and this is coming out of the New York Times and from a video on YouTube. And it closes everything down for 5 minutes. Nothing can be used at this point. But the question is, maybe when the pilot left, he put it on lock because he was the only one in there, and this might be their procedure that they decided on. And even when when the pilot was knocking on the door, how do they know that he didn't have a heart attack? That something else happened? Because he didn't respond. And usually when someone wants to commit suicide or someone is distraught or something like that, they talk back. And he didn't say anything. All they heard was breathing. So it seems like something is going on here. And of course, as soon as this happened, the United States government central bankers were out there saying, this is not terrorism, without any information or any type of investigation. They knew, which is suspicious right away. And what's very interesting, his friends saying that Andreas Lubitz never showed any sign he was anything but thrilled to have landed a job with Germanwings, according to those who taught him the trade as a teenager in the town in the woody hills of Western Germany. Members of the hometown flight club said, he never showed anything about being depressed. He always looked happy. He got his glider license last fall, and he appeared ecstatic about having this job. What they're saying is he gave everyone a good feeling. Now, of course, the corporate media is showing a different side, saying, oh, he was suicidal, he wanted to bring the plane down, and certain things don't make sense. They said he didn't do a nosedive. It was a gradual downing of the plane, which doesn't make sense to me whatsoever. And other things that are very interesting about this is that there were two black boxes, one with recordings and one with the digital information of what was happening on the plane. And they're saying that a part of it was damaged. And there's another story out there saying the memory card of one of the airplane's two black boxes is missing, and some saying that it was taken away, and then they reported it as damaged. And what's stored on the memory card is the audible recordings of the flight deck and detailed digital log of every flight command, environmental variable, flight control surface, altitude, heading, airspeed, and everything else you might imagine is important in an airliner crash investigation. And I find all this information coming out, it doesn't lead me to believe that this is what he really wanted to do, from people who actually knew him. And what's very interesting is that this all happened right before the invasion of Yemen. And if you notice, the top story has been on the plane crash and really not what's been going on in in Yemen with Saudi Arabia and the coalition forces. So was this done to distract us from what's really going on in the Middle East? It's starting to look that way, and everything really doesn't fit together at this point. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.